complete it.
To the pattern. So one big pleat, one little pleat.
Okay.
The Alonzo Kent Mansion, home of Robert H. Jackson Center. Jamestown is proud to be the site of the Robert H. Jackson Center. Here is revered Robert H. Jackson, one of the greatest jurists of all time, who was a justice of the United States Supreme Court and the outstanding chief prosecutor of the Nazi war criminals in Germany following the Second World War. The site chosen for this important center at the intersection of 4th Street and Prendergast Avenue was the Jamestown Scottish Rite Masonic Temple, which was originally the home of the very prosperous early Jamestown citizen named Alonzo Kent. He came to Jamestown in 1832 at the age of 22 years with a mere 50 cents in his pocket. Mr. Kent set up a writing school, a dry goods business, and later became president of a Jamestown bank, which he and 4 friends organized in 1853. The bank was located in his dry goods store and was reorganized in 1864 to become the first national bank of Jamestown. Alonzo Kent's energy led him to also buy a farm in the town of Bustye and build the Kent House Hotel in Lakewood, one of the largest on Lake Chautauqua. Being very interested in horses, he erected a large brick building behind the mansion in Jamestown to house them. This part of his total property was later altered by the Scottish Rite and made into the present auditorium and stage for the Masonic degrees. The Kent Mansion was the first brick home built in Jamestown. It was built in 1858. No expense was spared when this Italianate mansion was constructed. The finest woods were used in chambers designed by noted architects. The original entrance of the Kent home faced 4th Street, and it was under a large porch whose roof was sustained by handsome ionic pillars. The windows are semicircular, arched with elaborate cast iron caps and cast iron sills. In later years, an entrance was made on the Prendergast Avenue side of the home, where a circular driveway was created for cars to drop off their passengers, the cloakroom being just inside. It's hard to realize that the cloakroom was originally occupied by the Kents as the kitchen and pantry whose door would open onto the dining room. The dining room is now the boardroom of the center and is somberly elegant. It is centered with a modern table and chairs, above which hangs a brilliant multi-branched brass chandelier with matching sconces around the room. Its walls are covered with glossy panels of oak, and its windows, recently restored, are made of many small glass panes by many small glass panes held together by elegant strips of lead. A large china cabinet, almost as wide as the room, faces the fireplace. Its embossed and molded glass doors add to its elegance. It was in the dining room that weekend guests of the Alba Kents were entertained to menus, it is said, up to 17 courses. These noted guests were such as Mrs. Frederick Watrous, a member of New York's 400, and actresses Lillian Russell, Ethel Barrymore, to name a few. However, the most famous of all visitors to the mansion was the President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, who stopped on his way to the Chautauqua Institution on August 14th, 1875, where he had been invited to give a speech. It is here that the president once sat with his retinue to partake of a, quotes, collation consisting of 12 courses, close quotes, which were enjoyed by Governor Reuben Fenton, Governor Washburn, the Honorable Walter L. Sessions, Judge Marvin, the oldest member of the lower house of Congress, and General Babcock. Orsino Jorn is credited with the way in which the streets of Jamestown were decorated for the arrival of President Grant, who for most people was not only president, but also a great general and war hero worshipped by the populace. Jamestown streets were arched with evergreens, and from all the buildings hung flags and bunting, and across Main Street was a banner inscribed with the words, "Welcome to President U.S. Grant." When the president left the Kent mansion, by the way he was wearing a pale gray coat, Mr. Kent took him in his private carriage, drawn by two large black horses, which the president remarked were, quotes, "fine looking, but too fat for speed," end quotes. Crowds of people and carriages followed the president and wished him Godspeed as he boarded the yacht Josie Bell at the Jamestown boat landing and sailed off to Chautauqua, flanked by as many boats as would fit into the outlet. At the southeast corner of the mansion is a delightful and almost cozy little solarium completely enclosed in leaded glass panes. Can you imagine the pots of multicolored flowers, the climbing vines, the hanging baskets of blossoms, as Mrs. Alonzo Kent, in a long silk dress, inspected her kingdom of flowers? When Mrs. Kent died in 1866, the entire Kent mansion was full of flowers. Her husband survived her by only 2 years. In 1888, the Italianate villa was bought by Alonzo Kent's nephew, Alba Kent, and his wife, Mrs. Rose Eleanor Wetmore Kent. They lived in the house for 24 years. Through Mrs. Kent's substantial financial resources, many agreeable additions and improvements were made to the house. A third story was added to the building at the rear, and the beautiful oak and mahogany paneling throughout the home was inspired by Mrs. Kent's son, Charles D. Wetmore, who was a renowned architect of New York City, having built the Biltmore Hotel and the Grand Central Station. Mrs. Alba Kent is remembered as a gracious person who entertained beautifully and who loved flowers. She had rose gardens around her house and even between her home and the stables. The stables later were converted to be the present auditorium. Cut flowers were in all the rooms of the house, and the solarium acted as a small greenhouse. Mrs. Kent was so deeply interested in Christian Science that she built for that denomination its second church in New York State. It still stands at the southwesterly corner of 4th Street and Prendergast Avenue, across from the Jackson Center. When Mrs. Kent died on July 16, 1912, her funeral was one of the largest and most impressive ever held in Jamestown. Many who attended came in private railroad coaches. The casket was located in the corner of the mansion hall, directly under the staircase, which was completely banked with orchids, and the hall was filled with flowers banked to the ceiling. Many of the exotic flowers came from New York, friends of Charles Wetmore, Mrs. Kent's son, who, because of his prominence as an architect in New York City, was able to penetrate the New York theatrical and artistic scene and also marry Mrs. Frederick Watrous, one of the wealthiest women in New York society. Charles Wetmore and his bride lived at the mansion for 2 years and then moved to their beautiful house at Long Point on Chautauqua Lake. It was there that Mrs. Wetmore's daughter was married to Sir Henry Thornton, president of the Canadian National Railways. It is noted that 18 presidents of railroads of this country and Canada were present at the wedding, and there were 18 private cars on the sidings along the J&W and N&W Railway between Bemus Point and Mayville. Adjoining the dining room is the director's office, a pleasant room with lovely leaded windows and paneled with glossy cherry wood. A frieze of exquisite fluidity is carved in this same cherry wood above the fireplace, which is lined with a 2x2-inch ceramic tiles in depths blue. The room has many built-in shelves which lead one to believe it might have been a small library. An almost square large room is directly at the east of the original entrance to the house. Its elegant fireplace of white marble is adorned at its center arch with a large cluster of fruit. 2 large windows face what was once a rose garden. From the center of the highly decorated ceiling hangs an ornate chandelier, and above the mantel is a large square mirror with a black and gold chinoiserie frame recently incorporated into the room. It probably served as a reception room leading to the ornate French salon, which occupies the west corner on 4th Street and extends along Prendergast Avenue, where great windows faced gardens full of flowers. This room on the west side is often referred to as the Gold Room. It has a white marble fireplace similar to the one just described and an elegant chandelier of cut glass and gilded metal. Above the fireplace is a mirror which reflects the other side of the room. The furnishings of the room are at present completely inadequate. The decorating committee has plans to restore the room to its original Louis XV style. The furniture's gilded paint is to be replaced by its original wood and gold leaf, and the upholstery by some elegant French satin in the Louis XV style. The present wall cloth will be removed and substituted with more correct material. Because the second floor of the mansion is not readily accessible, no description of the upstairs floors are given here. However, we take you to the addition which was created when the Scottish Rite Masonic bodies bought the mansion in 1917. In spite of its size, the Masons greatly needed an auditorium and stage in which to exemplify their degrees. This problem was ingeniously solved with much work and expense by the conversion of Alonzo Kent's stables, which were previously not connected with the mansion on 4th Street. Alonzo Kent was a great lover of horses and owned many fine ones, as well as coaches and carriages of different types. To house them, he built a large brick building to the north of the mansion. The Masons moved the roof of this building and extended it upwards 12 feet to create a small auditorium of 240 seats, which looks down from a slant onto a well-designed theatrical stage behind velvet curtains for degree work. Below this auditorium, the Masons created a spacious dining room running the entire width of the building and a nicely equipped kitchen and storage area. This placed the dining area comfortably accessible to the Masons after their degrees by means of stairways on both sides leading up to the hall between the auditorium and the mansion. At one section of the hall connecting the auditorium and the mansion is a nice area where there are exhibited a quantity of very interesting and varied photos of Justice Jackson. Opposite those is a case of Jackson memorabilia and a case in which there is a figure wearing the elegant black suit which Mr. Jackson wore at official functions. In 1917, the Scottish Rite Masonic bodies acquired the Kent property. Then, in 2001, title to the property passed to its present owner, the Robert H. Jackson Center. I have given here a brief history of the Kent mansion and the Alonso Kent family and the Alba Kent family in order to help one visualize the kind of rich and important people who lived here. It's hard to comprehend the fact that a President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, and his retinue ever visited Jamestown, that he strolled these rooms as we do, that he looked into the very mirrors of the parlor that we now see. When a history of its owners and inhabitants, without a history of its owners and inhabitants, a house is just a house. How wonderfully appropriate it is that after the learned Masonic group who occupied the Kent mansion, it should now be owned and under the guidance of an association intent on preserving and promoting the legacy of one of the world's greatest jurists, Robert H. Jackson.
Terrific.
Shall I do it again?
Terrific.
Well, I hitched up once or twice there.
No, well, that's the beauty of editing.
I'm thinking as you're reading this, the visuals that we could edit to this, and
Yeah.
what a script this makes.
Yeah, this is
Do you
terrific.
want me to do it again, certain parts?
Are you happy?
I'm happy.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Oh, good.
It's fabulous.
Good.
You don't have to have a take or a retake. I want to talk about Sarita Weeks. Tell me about Sarita Weeks.
Thank you.
You were born
In Mexico City.
in Mexico City,
Yes.
and
And actually, very interestingly, I was born. In Mexico City, Daddy had quite a prominent position with the government. But in Mexico City, there were no hospitals, no good nurses or doctors. So Daddy had Dr. Giffen and his nurse, Miss Cross, come from Boston to Mexico City to deliver me in my own house.
wow.
And my mother was delivering me in her bed. Can you believe it? When the villistas came galloping into the square next to our house, shooting, and one of the bullets went into the bed just above my mother and lodged there. 2 bullets went into the billiard table, which was $2 down upstairs. So I was a very spoiled child. You know the household in Mexico with servants, the gardener, very, very, my nurse, my nanny, and the cook and the 2 chambermaids and a girl to embroider and another one to wash. You know, they're great big households, and I was very much loved. And I had a French governess. She was there morning, noon, and night, so that when we went to Switzerland, of course my mother spoke French.
We're going to stop you for a second, Sarita. Your father's role in the government was what?
He was just an engineer.
Engineer.
But not a pompous role, but a useful, very useful.
What was his name?
Charles Andrew Hopkins.
And your mother's name?
Sarah Mabel Sessions. There's a Sessions in this.
Sure.
And then the Charles Stephen Hopkins came over on the Mayflower.
Oh.
We have it all shown on a piece of paper that that's the Hopkins I come from. Well, my father was very, very excellent person, and my mother, of course.
Okay, now then you're from Mexico. Were you forced to leave Mexico?
Oh, no. We lived there about, do you want me to just chatter?
Please do. Absolutely, just go.
Oh, all right. We used to have to come up from Mexico City to see my grandmama, who lived in Fredonia.
Ah,
And so we would come up about every 2 years, 2.5 years, by train, 7 days and nights by Pullman, if you can believe it. We would come up from Mexico City to visit my grandmama, Mrs. Pierce, on Central Avenue. And it was at that time that my uncle, Chancey Sessions' sister, came with Stanley to visit him in Fredonia from Jamestown. And at that tender age, Stanley and I got acquainted. And when I went to Switzerland to live, Stanley kept corresponding with me. Nothing very serious, but he would send me the funny papers. You see, because in Switzerland it was only French funny papers, and I didn't have the Katzenjammer Kids and Mutt and Jeff and all of those remarkable things. So Stanley cut out the papers and sent them to me. And then little by little we got to corresponding more. And when I came to America again, after 7 years, Stanley invited me to go to a dance at Colgate, and oh my, it was love. But we lived in Switzerland. Shall I?
sure.
Well, we lived in Switzerland because Daddy had been told by this charming French young lady in Mexico that in Switzerland you might get the finest education on earth. And so off we went. My nanny, my mommy, and me, we went to Switzerland and stayed there 7 years. Oh, it's a lovely place.
Where in Switzerland?
It's just beautiful. Well, we were going from Paris to Neuchâtel, which was the place in Suisse romande, French Switzerland, near the Lake of Neuchâtel. We were going to Neuchâtel by train, and from Paris, and we noticed that the man, the conductor, picked up the tickets, and the ticket of the gentleman across the aisle from us was also for Neuchâtel. So when the conductor passed, Nani and Mommy and I spoke in Spanish, and my mother said to my Nani, it seems to me that if we could only ask this man about Neuchâtel, we might find out. It would be excellent. And would you believe it, this handsome chap stood up, he came over and did a very courteous bow to my mother and said, Señora, ¿les puedo ayudar de cierta manera? Por favor, díganme. Me gustaría mucho ayudarles. So, my mother said in Spanish, pues yes, I would love you to help me. We're going to Neuchâtel. We're going to establish ourselves there with a house so that my daughter can become part of the community and the public schools. And he said, well, it seems just excellent, doesn't it? Because I am the son of the Swiss consulate in Madrid, and he has just died. And I am going to Neuchâtel to sell his house,
Oh, wow.
which is there, And he said to my mother, would you be interested in that house? My mother said, oh, yellow, of course I would. And so Monsieur Chable, was the young man's name, got off at the station. His chauffeur was waiting, and he took my mommy up to La Rue Mathilde, numéro 3 Rue Mathilde, which was his father's home. And there was this lovely old home, a beautiful place, and it still had in it, of course, the servants. It had Elise, the cook, and it had Josephine, and it had another girl, I can't remember, 2 chambermaids and 1 cook, and then the best of all, Monsieur Sandeau, this strong gardener with a handlebar mustache. He was there to take care of the garden, which was very extensive and very beautiful. In fact, one of the paths of one of the gardens was nothing but alpine flowers. It was very beautiful, but then it had various ponds and waterfalls, and then also fresh vegetables in a completely other section of the garden. And I remember having tramped around this ivy and found these marvelous great big snails. And I was putting them in a basket, and I was going to throw them away because I told Monsieur Sandeau, you know, well, these are going to eat up your plants. So, Mademoiselle, what are you doing? Throwing away our snails. Those are the very best snails you can get. They grow beautifully on ivy, and they're fat and luscious. Just give them to the cook anytime you do. And then we could have them for dinner. Of course, we had snails often, and they were very delicious. But anyway, Neuchâtel, my mother didn't want to put me into any private anything because private was not Swiss. The public schools in Neuchâtel were very severe. You went to public school at 8:30 in the morning. You came back at noon. You went back to school a little before 2 and came back at 4:30. And every single day you worked hard. You know, but we wrote on ardoise, on those tiles. What is it? A gray slates. We wrote on slates because it was far more economical than paper. We only wrote on paper when it was something like an essay or something durable, but otherwise everything on ardoise with a pencil, a slate pencil here and a dirty rag here and a sponge and a little spit. It was very, very nice. But for 7 years, I worked. And I had such mental discipline that I could remember anything that was said to me quickly and accurately and well. And we, all of us, took Italian. We took Spanish if we didn't know it, which I did. We had French, and those who, well, I knew French also because I had a governess. And then if you didn't, you had to learn German. So into the mill I went, and with my little friends, I learned German and spoke it excellently. And of course, I learned Italian, which I loved, and I have my master's degree in Italian right this minute, and I used to teach it at Wisconsin University. But Switzerland didn't believe in being frivolous. They believed in being staunch and true and truthful and a good worker and not lose your time and not lose money and attain the best possible out of your life. Just shake it out of life and make it wonderful and good. Capital good and strong were the two main words. And there were no stupid little girls and, fussing and primping and squiggling around. It was and really, I have a feeling that right today, if some of the young people lived and had the mentality leading towards living in the Swiss manner, they'd be much happier than chasing for a rainbow, which they could never get. Well, anyway, then Daddy said it was time to come home to go to college.
Now, where was your father during this period of time?
Daddy was in Daddy was in South America and Central America. He had some kind of a exploration of coquito nuts for oil. And he went back and forth, to see us in Switzerland. But he couldn't be that long. He had to be mostly. But I remember once when we were living in Mexico, and this is reverting a little bit back, when we lived in Mexico, Daddy, on one of his expeditions, got me a beautiful monkey, a little monkey with a mico cara blanca, with a little white face
Right.
and a long tail. Oh, how I loved that monkey. And we came to America to see my grandmother. And instead of giving the monkey baby food, which was given to the monkey, they gave him frijoles and Mexican food from the kitchen, and he died.
Yeah.
Tragic. And then,
Were you, just go back to Mexico since we're there for a second, were you scared given the political climate that was going on?
oh, no.
No.
Oh, no. Of course, I was too small to know.
Right.
But really, our house was a huge French house,
Right.
Made completely of stone with carved things over the windows. And then it had a large formal garden, and around the garden it had a wall, maybe 5 feet, 6 feet tall, with on top of it pikes of metal the entire way around the whole garden. And at night we had a velador, a man who wore his big hat and his poncho and had a lamp, and he walked all around the property at night so that we would have no transgressors. Because in Mexico they would, they're so poor that they're very happy to have sticky fingers. And sometimes it's much more than sticky fingers. They just jolly well steal important things, like automobiles and things like that. But I don't know, I at Wellesley, I felt very, very resentful. Daddy wanted me to become American. He wanted me to get my bachelor's degree in America. And would you believe it? If I had stayed in Switzerland one more year, I would have had my bachelor's degree in Switzerland and gone on to another degree. But Daddy said, no, it has to be in America. So here I was 4 years at Wellesley, where the work was very, very easy. I mean, it was just too easy. But of course it was all in English instead of French.
Right.
So I had one teacher who was just a monster. At least she'll always be in my Miss Stern, she wanted me to write English composition properly. And of course I couldn't so well because I spoke in French all day long with my mother, everyone. And I had to write it in English. and had to learn. But anyway, I got a D in composition, and that was the only thing that kept me from getting a Phi Beta Kappa. So I'm sort of pleased when the newspaper publishes my little articles, and I think, well, I used to get a D. Now I'm writing more important. I mean, it's sort of silly to be that vain. But anyway, I was very resentful because I would have had Phi Beta Kappa without that one D
Right.
through the 4 years. But I at Wellesley, I was a member of the dance group, and then I was a member of the varsity golf. Golf has always been my joy. But it was in Switzerland, too. In Switzerland, the courses were absolutely beautiful. My mother loved to play golf, and she was one of the few women golfers in Neuchâtel. And the courses are up, down, beautifully kept usually, and wonderful fun.
So you come from Switzerland, you matriculate at Wellesley, you graduate from Wellesley,
Yes.
then where?
Well, then, let me see, in the summertime, I'd been given a scholarship to go to Middlebury Summer School. So, Miss Gabriela Bossano, the head of the Spanish department at Wellesley, excuse me, the head of the Italian department at Wellesley, offered me a scholarship to go to Middlebury College in Vermont, to the language school. And there, in the summertime, they have a language school of French, Italian, Spanish, and German, and another English one at another place. So she saw to it that all my paying was taken care of by scholarships, and I went for 4 years to the Italian school, La Scuola Italiana, and I obtained my master's degree in Italian with cum laude. And then after that, always more education, because my mother thought it was a very good thing to get things into my head. And I was most willing. I mean, I was like a sponge. Lots of young people don't want to learn. They don't want to be with an ambiente of learning. But, I love it. Right now, I sit in front of the history television just with my nose glued to find out everything that's happening. Well, anyway, after that, I was, my mother knew that I wanted to learn and do of the theater, because while I was at Wellesley, I had been asked to star in a small play, Goldoni's Locandiera, the innkeeper's daughter. And I had been the star of it with all of these men, the only woman in the whole cast. It was quite something. And so I did it at Harvard several times with Harvard cast. And then Yale wanted to have me go up there and do it, an Italian Yale cast, and me, the girl, to go up. So they managed so that I went up there, and I had one wonderful time, and very successful. It was very good. All in Italian, only with the cast was all Yale. Well, I liked it so much that I said to my mother, I want to go back to Yale to study. You know, that sounds very good. And so I went to Yale for 4 years. And oh, what a nice, interesting time I had. I learned everything pertaining to the theater, make scenery and to paint it, to, of course, to act, to to direct shows. And in fact, that's why I was so good at directing shows when I came back here in Jamestown. I directed quite a few shows. In fact, I had Gilbert and Sullivan. I directed for about 10, 12 years. The whole opera that we did down Jamestown. We did Gilbert and Sullivan, the Mikado, HMS Pinafore, everything down here in Jamestown. Then I did a Coventry play, some medieval plays at St. Luke's, actually on the stage. I designed the costumes also at Yale. And I did all kinds of translations for Allardyce Nicholl. Allardyce Nicholl was the head of the drama department at Yale. Very erudite British scholar. And every single year he would send Mr. Kernodle to Europe on Lord knows whose money to photograph dramatic letters or pieces of plays or whatever could be found in private collections of medieval theater and so on. And Mr. Kernodle every single year came back with a pile of these little teeny tapes, which he would in turn into pages of manuscript from different places, from different castles, from different museums. He had the entrée anywhere. And I remember he would have them made into sheets like this. And then, who should get the sheets but me? And I got these sheets, as much as a pile of them this tall. And they were very, very interesting. For example, one of the sheets I remember so well, it was Messer. It was something from about the 14th century, an old, half Italian, half Latin, but I got very good at it because I did so much of it. Messer, enclosed you will find this letter, which I am sending to you with great haste. I wanted to tell you that I have prepared the book for your enemy. It is most beautifully illustrated in gold and colors, but we shall remember his bad habit of licking his finger each time he turned the page. So he said, "So, Miss Saird, I want to inform you that by the time your friend will have licked the last page, he shall have enough poison in him to just depart from this life."
Oh, wow.
And so on. So I had all kinds of things like that to read and study. And of course, Allardyce Nicholl paid me grandly for translating every single page. And so it kept me in very good pocket money. And so I went constantly to New York City and had a gorgeous time here, there, and everywhere. I just talk forever. It's just like turning a machine on. That's not good.
It's great. And during this time, Stanley's keeping in touch with you?
Yes, sort of. We correspond occasionally. I come to a few dances here. But when he went to the service, I had gotten out of Yale. Actually, I should have gotten and worked hard and gotten my doctorate at Yale. But somehow, I haven't finished the thesis. But they say, anytime you want to finish your thesis, you can do so. Well, you're lazy. But I had to get a job. My mother thought I'd better get a job instead of being useless. So I had a job at, the last one was the University of Wisconsin. Then before that, it was Randolph-Macon Women's College in Virginia, which was very agreeable. It was lovely young Virginian Southern girls, and nothing more attractive. and charming and lovely golf down there. And then I was at Cooperstown, where they had the Knox School. And there was where Stanley came to see me. And you have no idea. I lived at La Maison Française. And everyone spoke French. The teachers living there and the students. And Stanley came up the steps in one of those, to the Maison Française, in his navy blue uniform, and so handsome and straight and young. And I looked through the window and up above from the stairs, and so did all my little friend pupils, as it were. And we all just, well, anyway, they kept close track of me, and Stanley came back many times, and as I was teaching there.
Mhm.
But that's the way it started.
When did he propose to you?
Oh, dear.
Or how did he propose to you?
Oh, it was just so logical. I hardly remember how. It's just so logical that we should be married. And, well, anyway, we've had a most wonderful life. We have 56 years together.
Great.
You know?
Congratulations.
Yes, and I mean, Stanley and I were both very antique. Oh, my. Stanley is 90, and I am 89 tomorrow.
Can you believe this? You've kept very busy and very active, and therefore you're very youthful looking.
Oh, thank you. Well, anyway, I'm telling the truth,
Well,
because it's tomorrow.
Happy birthday.
No, day after tomorrow,
Yeah.
Sunday.
Happy birthday.
Sunday, thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. No, but when I was here in Jamestown, I immediately put my services to making costumes to the Masons. And by Jove, I've made over 100 costumes for the Masons. The most difficult costumes I ever made for them, 2 of them were the Swiss Guards. You know the Swiss Guards that you've seen with all these pieces,
Right.
yellow and navy and dark red slits, and well, 2 of those I made for them. I made a gorgeous Pope's costume. I went to New York City and bought some material at $60 a yard for the Pope's cape. They gave me carte blanche because they had to be right. And so I must have made about 100 costumes. I don't know how they take care of them, good, bad, or not. I have no idea.
A lot of them are probably still here in the wardrobe room, aren't they?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't. But they use them. They use them
Sure
all
do.
the time. And it was my pleasure. And I also got paid, which is always something nice. But Stanley is just very sweet and quiet, and I'm perhaps a little less quiet. So maybe it's a good mixture.
It's been a wonderful mixture. What's your highlight, Sarita? When you close your eyes and say, gee, there's a couple of things I did which were really quite special, what would you say? You've traveled all over the world. You've met fascinating
Yes, I
people.
have. I've been every place in the world. Afghanistan, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, Iraq. Well, the thing is that I used to take people. My zipper is opened up here. I'm sorry. That looks better, doesn't it?
You've been fine.
I forgot. I used to take people traveling, and I used to enjoy it, and they used to enjoy it. We started traveling I had the Fine Arts Travel Society, and Stanley thought, after about 10, 12 years of doing it, he thought that, people have gotten so mean about making, suing you and so on. He said I'd better stop it. But for over 10 years, I had the Fine Arts Travel Society, and we went to Buffalo, we went to Toronto, we went to New York every single fall for the opera and plays and museums, and everything included, a lovely dinner at Sarita's or whatever it was, and very reasonable. We'd go by bus. Ron Matter, the driver, I just saw the other day, and he remembered it. We'd go up there early in the morning and come back a long weekend. And then from that Fine Arts Travel Society, we started, they said, well, why don't we go to Europe? So I'd take them for 3 weeks to Europe. A beautiful little trip. The companies in New York would always do it beautifully. We'd have everything very, very comparatively inexpensive, but first-class hotels, 3 meals a day and so on. Then after Europe, we went several times to Europe. We went to Africa. We went to Morocco and Tangiers and all of those places. And we went there twice. And then after that, we decided that we wanted to go down farther to South Africa. So we went to Cape Town, to Kenya, to the the game reserves, and then down Victoria Falls and Cape Town. We had a lovely time, 3 weeks on that one. Then Carol Vandermolen, and I remember, said, why don't we go to China? Yes, okay. I'd been to China twice anyway, on my own, with Lindblad Travel, it was usually it. They took me there, top company, beautiful. We went to China when nobody was around. Nobody was on that wall except me and maybe 6 people. It was just very nice, very nice. And so we went to China. That would be my 3rd time. Carol Vandermolen, 17 others. Some other ladies, I don't know, Mrs. Oh dear, I have a picture of all the ladies that went with me around the world for the first time. We took about, maybe about 5 weeks. And I have Mrs. Whedon, oh dear. But I have all the pictures of them. It appeared in a newspaper. Well, I took them around the world. Then, of course, we went just to China. Then we went around the world. Good. I've been 5 times around the world with people, plus me by myself. And then with Stanley. He got around the world before I did. Can you believe it? Some quirk. I had to stay home and he went. And I was green with envy. You have no idea how envious I was when he went. And anyway, I've been to Mongolia and places like that, which are quite nice, really. And then I took 4 times people to Malaysia, Singapore, that beautiful, clean, stylish place, and then Japan, and all of those. And then I went myself with Stanley once, and once by myself, and took people to Australia and New Zealand. But that's nothing so much to brag about. I mean, it's a little bit on the, sort of common. It's nothing exotic, that's what I mean. Except that I got a kangaroo coat there, which is very inexpensive and pretty. And what else?
You've met some interesting people.
Yes, but I don't remember them.
You wrote an article about Roger Tory Peterson one time.
Oh, yes. Well, I had gone to Bhutan, Bhutan, way, way up in the Himalayas. And I wanted to go to Bhutan because I hadn't been there. I have this big map in the kitchen on the wall under glass. And I look at it and I said, I haven't been there. So immediately, it was very fortunate that I had my mother's money to do all of this with. So I was, I was just coming from Bhutan, and that's way up in the Himalayas. And I was just coming, and he was just going. And would you believe it, as I got off the airplane, then I got into the countryside a bit, and he was there. We met. Mrs. Weeks, what are you doing here? And I said, Mr. Roger Torrey Peterson, what are you doing here? You know, of all queer places to meet up in the Himalayas. But he was such an erect, handsome gentleman, and so very, but people of great importance. You know, I just can't. I have a feeling that I have some people that are very important, but
What's next for you?
we are to go to Florida. We're leaving on December, I think 7th or something.
Oh, really?
Yes. We have to we have to stay over December 5th because the Chamber of Commerce has very kindly said that they would give us an award on the 5th of December. So we have to stay here. But then we're going down to Florida. And we have a nice house with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and it's right on a golf course. So
Perfect.
we'll be able to just be lazy and play a little golf. And maybe I can do a little writing, I don't know. But, you know, it's just nothing, doing nothing. I'd rather really, truly go to some place where the little girls are wasp-waisted and perhaps a little dirty, but I mean, they have to have something exotic about them a little. I think it's more interesting than normal people. Don't you think so?
Mm-hmm. Do you have any places you want to travel to?
Albania, I've never been. No, there are only 2. Liberia and Albania are the only 2 places I haven't been. And the Poles, and I have no wish to go to the Poles. None. I suppose because I'm so ignorant. But,
Nobody will ever say that of you, Sarita Weeks, being ignorant.
oh, thank you for saying that. But, you know, I love to go to travel. It's something that is right in my blood, whereas it isn't in Stanley's. I mean, he wants to go to where? Scotland.
Oh, yeah.
Scotland. And Scotland is, you know, he went to China. He went around the world, but he'd rather go to Scotland. So, I mean, I don't have any place of preference, except that I enjoy going to a country which speaks Spanish. So in last year we were, we were in Costa Rica and the Canary Islands and Guatemala, and they all speak Spanish, which I'm happy about. The year before we were in South Africa for 4 months, but I have collected the most beautiful assortment of costumes, native costumes from every single place I've been. They're beautiful things, and I spent thousands of dollars on them. And I gave them to the Buffalo Museum of Science. And would you believe it? They've hung them up and done nothing with them. When they had Dr. Gramley as the president, you know, of their department there, he had the cases. He had 20 cases full of my costumes from Latin America. He did these things with my costumes, and people would swarm. But this man, who is lazy, would rather pay to have a man come in and show a show on dinosaurs than to go to the clothes presses, take the mannequins, which I bought 50 of them, to dress them with costumes from Malaysia, costumes from Afghanistan, beautiful Afghani coat of fur, black fur on the underneath, and then the whole outside is embroidered with great red flowers and blue iris, all embroidered in silk, just lovely things. And the shadris, that women wear over the head to the bottom here. I have the real thing, one wedding sari that I bought in India, which I attended the wedding, and then the mama had the sari on her daughter, these beautiful beet red, lovely thing. And I said, may I please buy that? And she said, oh, but madam, how can I sell it to you when what I have to do is to burn it and melt down all the gold embroidery in it to make for gold embroidery for my next daughter.
I'll be there.
So I told her, no, please let me have that sari. So I finally got it for $1,000. So what? It's in Buffalo, nobody's seen it.
Yeah.
It's not fair. It's not fair. I don't know, if only somebody would take and make a museum for my costumes in Jamestown, I'd get